part of all of that is the resources that are available to you. So making sure that you have food, making sure that you have the tech support that you need, making sure that you have all that support that you need. So here's just some resources that are available to you as students, and you can email me at nlopez@dvc.edu if you need any specific links. So there's a student guide, which is the transition to remote instruction. That's supposed to say spring 2021, but there's a tech student loan request form. There's COVID-19 emergency grant. We have online tutoring with NetTutor. We have the Academic Support Center. We have the DVC and community resources during uncertain times. We have wellness group counseling. We have free food resources. We have grocery bag and food box distributions. And then also the weekly success tip emails that you get every week. So a lot of these resources that are available to you have a lot of good resources in them. So if you're getting the emails, make sure that you look through them. If you need food resources, or if you need, the emergency grant or the tech student loan requests, make sure that you're reaching out and getting those resources, because part of testing effectively and studying is having those resources to do that effectively. And also when we're hungry, we don't really pay attention as well as we can. So that's why, having those food resources is also really important. So again, if you need any of the specific links, go ahead and email me at nlopez@dvc.edu, and Noha also put that in the chat box as well. There is a question in the chat box about how does NetTutor work, and NetTutor works off of your Canvas site, and then there's also a website as well. So if you want that direct link, you can go ahead and email me and I can send that to you. So we're going to talk about note-taking strategies, and there are a couple of SpongeBob memes in this PowerPoint. I'll already kind of say that. But so taking notes, so this is the first step in studying. So it's taking effective notes, studying effectively, and then finally testing effectively. And again, right now we're in a pandemic. So a lot of us are online learning. It looks very different than if we were in class. So I have strategies that can be used for synchronous classes that have live meetings, asynchronous classes that are 100% online with no live meetings, and then also some note-taking strategies and testing and studying that we can utilize once we're back in the classroom. So this PowerPoint is kind of a catch-all for online learning and then when we're back in the classroom as well. So you can utilize these skills when we eventually go back to the classroom. So the first one is note-taking itself. So how we take notes is really important. And there's a variety of ways in which we take notes, whether it's by pen and paper, whether it's on the computer, whether we take notes at all, which we should be. There's a lot of different ways. A really common way is the Cornell method. This is where you divide your paper into 2 columns. And the idea is that one column is for everything you're writing down during class. And then after class, the second column is so you can pull out key terms so that you can easily navigate your notes and easily find where certain sections are. So for the right column, the right-hand side, that is where you put all your notes. So everything that your instructor says during the course that you think is important, you write that all down there. And then after the lecture, on the left-hand side, you put any key phrases. So that way you know exactly where each section is. So again, recording lecture in the right-hand column, reducing on the left-hand side. So the way that you can use this to study is by reciting the information using the keywords, reflect, relating the material to our own experiences and adding new thoughts always helps us retain our information better. And you're going to hear me say retain a lot tonight, because retaining our knowledge is really important. We're constantly, being bombarded with all of this knowledge during our lecture, and we want to figure out the best ways to retain that knowledge, to keep that knowledge so that eventually we can use that knowledge on our tests to get the score that we want. And when we add our own experiences, that helps us retain our knowledge better. Another thing that also helps us retain knowledge better is multiple exposures. So we get multiple exposures by attending our live lecture or watching the recorded PowerPoint if that's what your instructor does, or looking at the PowerPoint multiple times. The more times that we have exposure to our material, the better that we are to retain it. Also with the Cornell method, you review. So you use the left column throughout the term. You can review for midterms or for your final. If you have papers coming up, you can always use that left side where all the key terms are to review. There are other forms of note-taking though. Like I said, there are multiple forms of note-taking. The Cornell method is just one of those forms, and you really need to see what the best form is for you and what works best for you. So another thing that you can do is using an outline format. So you put the topic on one line and then the supporting details below. So if I'm in psychology and I'm in social psych and we're talking about bystander theory, I would put bystander theory and then I would put all the information below. So that's one other form of note taking. You can also write all the information down on one sheet of paper and then go back in and highlight all the key points after. That's another option. Notes can be taken by hand or by the computer. There's a lot of note-taking apps like OneNote, which you get Microsoft Office free through your student email. If you need help downloading that, you can also email me and I can walk you through it. But you get Microsoft Office free through your email, and it has OneNote, which is a like note-taking app that you can utilize. And so that's one way. Or there's something called Evernote, or you can use, notes in your phone or your iPad or your computer if they have sticky notes. There's all these different ways on how to take notes, and it's figuring out what best way works for you. When I was in college, it happened to be handwriting was the best way that I retained knowledge. I didn't really use the computer. I more so wrote everything down. With writing everything down, it's also important to create your own abbreviations. So what I used to do is in class, I would have a legend at the top of my paper, and I would put down my own abbreviations, because there's nothing worse than using abbreviations and then after the lecture, finding out that you don't remember what that abbreviation was. So I would put down all of the abbreviations. So there's some common ones like BC for because, W for with, WO for without, EX for example, or DIFF for difference. But if you're in courses that have really long name for things, then it might be better to create an abbreviation and then put that in the legend so that way you can go back later and reference it. It's also more helpful too because you are saving time if you do that as well. So instead of writing out the entire word, instead you only might be writing a couple of letters. So again, it's whatever form of note-taking works best for you. Maybe that's the computer, maybe that's handwriting, maybe it's the Cornell method, maybe it's outlining and then highlighting after. Whatever works best for you. And you might have to try a couple different methods to really see what works best for you. So some important reminders about note-taking. So one, if you are handwriting notes, write legibly. So I have definitely been that student in the past where I took a bunch of notes and then after I had no idea what they said. And then we can't really use them to study very much. So write legibly is really, really important so that you can actually read your notes after. If you're using a computer, you don't really have to necessarily worry about that. Date your notes. So it's important to know what date you took your notes, especially if you are using loose leaf paper as opposed to a notebook, just in case one were to fall or you were, walking and your papers fell. It's important to know the order and what date they're on. Keep notes for one class together in one notebook or in one document on the computer. So I have a notebook. It's just one notebook, and I would write down all my notes in one notebook instead of having it on loose leaf paper where I ran the chance of losing a piece of paper, or if I have it in multiple notebooks, then it gets a little bit more confusing. If you are writing it online, make sure it's all in the same document. So you can use a Microsoft Office document, the OneNote application that I was mentioning. You can write different tabs in like the same notebook area, which is helpful, and you can date them. You can also use, Google Docs as well, but just make sure that you're dating so that you know what date or what chapter all the notes are for. It's also important to review each day and at the end of the day. So again, multiple exposures to the information is going to help you retain the information better. So you want to try to review it multiple times. So this leads me to my first question. Within 20 minutes after a lecture, what percentage of knowledge do you think we lose? So after we've had a lecture, whether it's a live lecture or we've watched a PowerPoint, or if we're back in person and we've just listened to a lecture, what percentage of knowledge do you think we lose? Go ahead and put your answer in the chat box. Okay, so I have some 40s, some 60s, 65s. Okay, so I have some high numbers. So we lose about 95% of what we're exposed to over a period of time. 53% of that happens within the first 20 minutes after exposure. So this is called Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve. And as you can see, we have at time 1, so right after we've had the lecture, we are maintaining 100% of what we just learned. And then it's going to go ahead and decrease all the way to 31 days where we're at 21%. But 53% of that happens within the first 20 minutes after the lecture. So what's our solution to this? It's multiple exposures to the information. And that's not cramming the night before. Cramming the night before is proven not to be helpful. So if you have a test, let's say at Friday at 9 a.m., if you pull an all-nighter and show up to class, it's proven that that's not helpful necessarily for retaining knowledge. But if you have multiple exposures over a course of time, that is more helpful for retaining all of the knowledge. And we'll talk about specific study plans that can help you have multiple exposures and retain the knowledge better. So for more note-taking tips regarding synchronous or live meeting classes and asynchronous recorded lectures or PowerPoints. So for synchronous classes, if you have live meetings, asking questions during the live meeting when you have them, or go to student or office hours, but don't wait till exam day. If you have questions, and this goes for synchronous, asynchronous, or when we're back in person, make sure that you ask them right away. Don't let yourself be confused for 2 weeks or for a week. Make sure that you ask right away so that you can get clarification and so you can start learning that material and still have multiple exposures. Prepare for class by reviewing previous materials, including notes. So before we have class, this is synchronous, asynchronous, when we're back in person, make sure that you're preparing by reviewing your previous notes. This is another exposure to those notes. It's going to help you retain better, and it will help you be more prepared for class. Stay until the very end if possible to catch summaries. Usually professors will give a summary at the end of class, which will help. And also if you have any questions or might be confused on a subject, this might also help clarify that as well. So these are some tips for synchronous live meeting classes. Some tips for asynchronous recorded lectures or PowerPoints. Again, come to office hours or student hours to ask questions or send an email when you have a question. Don't wait for exam day. We're here to answer questions. We're here to help you work through material. If you have questions or you need clarification, please reach out, please ask, because it's important that you get clarification as soon as possible. Also, prepare for recorded lectures or PowerPoints by reviewing previous material, including notes. So it's very, very similar. You want to go ahead and review the previous material before jumping into new material. One, because we get more exposures, we're better able to retain the information. And also then it's kind of, a review leading into the next chapter. So for some courses, each chapter may build upon itself. Some courses, each chapter may be a little bit different, but it's still good to review all of that information. So tips whether or not your class is asynchronous or synchronous. If possible, exchange and compare with someone in your class. So this can be done in a variety of ways. So there's Google Hangouts, there's texting, FaceTime, Google Docs, there's Zoom. But when you have collaboration, you're maybe able to answer something that your friend is having trouble with, and maybe they're able to answer something that you're having trouble with. Just don't copy off of each other, I guess is kind of the note to make about this one, but it's okay to discuss these ideas with other people and kind of get feedback and information. These would be things that you might be doing if we were in person, but just due to the online nature, it might be harder for the classes. So exchange, take classes with your friends. It's important to have that collaboration. Again, for synchronous meetings, you can leave empty space in your notes to fill in gaps later. So this is a note anytime. So either synchronous, asynchronous, or when we're back in the classroom, leave leave room for spaces if you end up getting lost in a lecture. Don't try to backtrack and catch up. Just keep going, and then at the end, fill those things back in. If you are having live meeting classes, ask if the professor can record the session and post it later. That way you can look back on the lecture and see what was going on and see kind of the things that you missed. For asynchronous courses, so recorded lectures or PowerPoints, watch the video more than once. So if you're watching something by yourself, maybe watch it 2 or 3 times to really retain the information. It also allows for more exposures to the information. And you can also stop or rewind the video to get clarification. So if you are struggling during one point or you're confused and need clarification, go ahead and stop the video and rewatch that part. Don't finish out the video and then go back. Make sure that you get clarification in the moment that you need it, because the sooner we get clarification, the better we are able to retain. So this leads us into study strategies and my second SpongeBob meme of the presentation. There are a few more, but this leads us into our study strategies. So how to study effectively brings in a couple of different things. 1, the time of the day it is. 2, how long we study. Creating favorable conditions, generating a positive attitude, and developing good techniques. These are all important things when we think about how we study. So whether it's morning or afternoon or nighttime, whether or not we're studying for 6 hours or 5 hours or 2 hours, what our conditions look like, what our attitude is, and then finally just developing good techniques. If we develop good techniques and we keep doing them, eventually they become a habit and studying becomes easier. So time of day. So there are 2 types of people. There are larks, which are morning people, and owls, which are night people. So go ahead and put in the chat if you are a lark or an owl or a mixture of both. I am a mixture of both, but I've been leaning towards the owl side lately, especially giving a presentation at 5:30. Okay, so we have some good mixtures. Okay, so it seems like we have a mixture of owls and larks, and then also some individuals like me who are a mixture of both. Knowing what type of person you are, whether or not you're a lark or an owl, helps inform when you study. So if you're a morning person, it's better than to study in the morning. You're more awake, you'll probably have more energy, and you're going to retain the information better if you're studying in the morning. If you're a night owl, then studying at night is better. You're going to be more energetic at night. You are going to be able to retain the information better, and you'll be more awake. So that kind of informs what time of day you do study at. Another thing that this might inform is time of classes as well. So morning people tend to do better with morning classes. Night owls tend to do better with night classes, as much as your schedule can allow for that. So our next thing that we're going to talk about is how long we should study. So there's another SpongeBob meme that says me after 5 minutes of studying. So we should only really be studying about an hour, 45 minutes at a time. We shouldn't be sticking ourselves in what used to be the library, but now, just wherever space you can study, whether it's the kitchen table, whether or not you have an extra room in your house or apartment, or whether or not you're studying outside. Wherever you're studying, you should be studying about 45 minutes to an hour and then taking a 5 to 15 minute break. So, if that's going on a walk, if that's watching Netflix, if that is getting a bite to eat, whatever way your break looks like. So some of us may be studying for longer than an hour or 45 minutes at a time, which is awesome. But also we tend to either get more fatigued if we study for a really, really long time, or we don't retain the information as well as in the case where we take a break. So the break can be 5 minutes, it can be 15 minutes. You kind of gauge it on what you need. So it might look like getting up and just getting a drink of water and going right back to studying, or you might need a little bit longer of a break than that. Every 2 to 4 hours, take a 30-minute break. So again, a walk, you can scroll on your phone, you can go watch a show, you can get a bite to eat, whatever that looks like for you. So, part of the reason, so some of us may be able to study for long periods of time, but part of the reason that we don't encourage studying for long periods of time, especially now that we're on the computer all the time, is one, we tend to get computer fatigue or Zoom fatigue. Our eyes may start to hurt if we are constantly looking at the computer. And also, a lot of times we may get distracted or we may become bored with whatever we're studying. So, that's why we suggest taking a break every hour, 45 minutes, or 2 to 4 hours, taking a 30-minute break. One of the things that I always kind of like to talk about is the fact that sometimes you're studying, you may only be 5 minutes into studying, and you're already bored. You're rereading the page multiple times, you're not retaining information, and you're just not really interested in studying. At that point, I usually say take a break and come back. So either switch subjects to another subject you're supposed to be studying, or take a break, go get a drink of water, go get something to eat, go on a walk, and then come back. Because when we read pages multiple times and we don't remember what is on that page, that doesn't mean that we're retaining information. It's not really helping us study at that point. So that's why it's suggested to go take a break or, to switch subject matter at that point. We retain knowledge best when we're actually actively engaged with the information and we're not tired or hungry or thirsty, and there's no distractions around us to distract us from studying. So, favorable conditions. So, a big question is, can you concentrate? And right now, we're in the middle of a pandemic. And so, everyone's kind of more so cramped into their houses, maybe more so than normal. So, conditions may not necessarily always be favorable. You might have a family member who's constantly in the background. You may not be able to get to a quiet space. You may not have, your own space to be in. So, trying to make conditions as favorable as possible. So, a big question is, can you concentrate on the information? Are there any distractions around you? Are there, screaming children? Do you have a TV blaring near you? Is there traffic noise from the street? Is there any distractions around you? And trying to minimize distractions as much as possible. So, again, right now we're in kind of a tricky situation where necessarily libraries aren't open versus they were before. So, we kind of need to make best with what we have. Another part is creating a schedule. So, studying at specific times each week. And again, the more we do something, the more we make it part of just our routine, it becomes a habit and we get a lot better at studying. So, picking specific times each week to study and then arranging hard subjects when fresh. So, a hard subject is different for every person. For me, that might be physics. I might want to study physics right after I either watch the live lecture with my synchronous course or after I watch the recorded lecture. So, trying to arrange your hard subjects first and then moving on to subjects that you may find are easier or just less hard. So, positive attitude. So, it's really good to have a positive attitude when we're studying because that will lead to a more positive experience with the test. And then ultimately, that leads to the potential of getting a higher grade. So, when we're in a better mood, we tend to retain things better, we tend to test better versus if we're stressed out, if we're upset, all of those different factors. And again, I know right now it's difficult for everybody. So, we're just trying to make the best with what we have. But with a positive attitude, make sure that you clarify goals. So, how does this test or exam or paper or project fit into my goals? Do I need an A on this? Do I need a B? Can I get a C and still get the grade that I want? How does this really fit? Because some individuals go in only needing a C, and that's fine. But knowing what you need and how it fits is really, really important. Finding a way to make the subject meaningful is something that I mentioned earlier. So, when we have information that is meaningful, we're able to retain it better. So, we're able to retain information better when it is actually meaningful to us, when we're able to kind of make that connection. So, asking questions and being an active learner is also important. So, like I mentioned, if you have questions, please reach out to your professors and let them know and talk to them. You can either email them or set up a time to go to student hours or set up an appointment outside of that, but just make sure you're an active learner. And then rewarding yourself is also really, really important. And a reward can look a lot of different ways. So, rewarding yourself after your study period. I like food. So, a reward for myself might be food, but it can be other things. So, a reward can be food, like I said, or going on a walk, or listening to music, scrolling through Instagram or TikTok for 20 minutes. It can also be watching a show, or maybe, going out and seeing your friend for like a socially distanced walk. So, whatever that looks like for you, make sure that you kind of give yourself a reward after each study period. And it doesn't have to be big, but just give yourself something. That way, you can kind of have a positive attitude about studying. So, if you're rewarding yourself, you're going to go ahead and think about studying in relations to a reward, and then you're going to feel good, and that's going to contribute to your positive attitude about studying. So, rewarding yourself is important. Some good techniques. So we're going to talk about techniques in which to study. So there's something called the SQR3, and that is one of the study techniques that you can implement. And this includes multiple exposures so that you have a lot of exposures to the material versus just cramming at the end. So the SQR3 stands for survey, questions, read, recite, and review. So survey, or skimming the section, whether it's a textbook, research articles, PowerPoint slides. Look for keywords, figures, and summaries. Questions, so write yourself little questions for each major topic, and then read and answer the questions that you have written down. This helps just, test whether or not we really remember concepts. Recite the main points, and then review. So create a one-page summary sheet, again, for if your class has research articles, if your class has a textbook, if your class has PowerPoints, you can use this technique for all of those different kinds. Some additional techniques are using repetition to increase remembering. So something like flashcards. And you do not have to create your own flashcards. There are a lot of places online that you can go to where they already have flashcards. So something like Quizlet, which I am only saying to use Quizlet for flashcards, but they have already pre-created flashcards. So instead of, taking the time to create your own, you could go online and find them already. If you have a online system attached to your textbook, so for instance, like Cengage has MindTap, there are also flashcards already built into that as well that you can access. So you don't have to spend all the time creating them by yourself. You can access them online. Reviewing summary sheets and chapters weekly. Again, this is just more exposure to the information so you can retain it better. And then create associations, analogies, metaphors, and summaries. So again, the more we tie this to our own personal experience, the better that we are able to retain the information. There's also the 7-day study plan. So on day 1, you organize notes, materials, and the textbook. Day 2, you review lectures. Day 3, you review the text. Day 4, you review the lecture and the text. Day 5, reviewing the lecture. Day 6, review the text. And day 7, review everything. So this is another option in a way in which you can study that has multiple exposures to the information. So the 7-day study plan or the SQR3 are both ways in which you can study for an upcoming exam or quiz. So dealing with some problem areas. So there are some problem areas that we typically need to deal with when it comes to studying. A huge one is procrastination. We procrastinate on starting studying. We procrastinate on watching maybe our recorded lectures if we aren't in a synchronous class. And the best way to deal with this is just to start quickly or to take the first step. So if you get a study guide for your midterm or for your quiz or exam, then as soon as you get that, just starting to study and start to do all of that review. There's a TED Talk that I recommend. It's called Inside the Mind of a Master Procrastinator by Tim Urban. This is a TED Talk that I show in all of my courses, so I recommend that you watch it because it gives you some insight into procrastination and procrastinating with things that have deadlines versus things that don't have deadlines. So I watch that, or I show that in every one of my psych classes. A second problem area is concentration. And again, we talked about removing distractions as best as possible. So given the situation, just trying to have the least amount of distractions as possible. When we deal with boredom, switching subject matter. So if you are bored reading something, switch subject matter, take a break, come back to it. Try to be more active, ask questions, maybe use one of the study plan suggestions, and also, try to relate it to yourself as well. Those are going to be all ways in which we can better retain the information. So finally, we are going to go over testing strategies. And I have no great SpongeBob meme for this slide, but we're going to go over testing strategies. So when we think about taking a test, we think about studying the information and taking the actual test. But that's not all there is when it comes to taking tests. So taking care of yourself is also really important. Sleep, which we should be getting 7 to 8 hours a night for sleep, which I feel is very important. So I'm going to say it again. 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night is best. That's going to help with retention. You take tests better when you're not tired, and chugging a Red Bull before you begin a test does not make up for sleep. So sleeping 7 to 8 hours a night is best. Making sure that you're using proper hygiene, eat a healthy breakfast or lunch or dinner, depending on what time your test is. So making sure that you're not hungry. And again, I mentioned that we have free food resources in case anybody is in need. Having a positive attitude and being relaxed about the test. Now, I know this doesn't sound easy, but as best as you can, that's going to help contribute to a potentially higher test score. Arriving a few minutes early. So some of you may be having tests live over asynchronous classes. Some of you may be taking tests over Canvas, depending on kind of what your test looks like. Arriving a few minutes early works for, live tests or for when we're back in person. For Canvas, it's usually open for a set amount of time. So arriving a few minutes early doesn't necessarily apply to that as much, but make sure if you have a Canvas test and it's open for a certain amount of time, make sure that you enter into Canvas before the time limit is up. So if you have 45 minutes for a quiz, for instance, and your quiz is due at 11, make sure that you go ahead and log on to Canvas by 10:15. That way you have the full time to access the quiz. When you're taking tests, tend to sit away from doors, windows, or other distractions. This is a helpful piece of advice, whether you're taking tests online, on Zoom, or when we're back in person. Make sure that you're staying away from doors, windows, and other distractions, because it's just going to distract you while you're taking your test. Think of a reward for yourself after the exam is over. So for me, I might think of like an ice cream sundae. Again, I'm very food oriented, but think about a reward for yourself. Something that you're going to give yourself. It doesn't have to be large, but just think of something to give yourself. Again, we want to associate tests and studying with positive feelings because then that helps us do better. You want to scan the whole test and check point values and budget your time accordingly. So this is also dependent on whether or not you have time limits on your tests or whether or not you have unlimited time. But you still want to scan your whole test. You want to check your point values and you want to budget your time and making sure that you are not spending too much time on something. I'm going to say it again, read your directions twice. It's really important because you want to make sure that you're reading them correctly and don't get tripped up on anything. Think of the exam as an opportunity to show the professor what you know. So you took good notes, you did a great job studying, and now you're going to take the test and show the professor what you've learned over the last few chapters or the last few weeks. So some advice for taking tests. Answer the easy questions first. So some of you may have tests in which you have to answer one question and then go to the next, or you're presented with all the questions at the same time. But you want to answer the easy questions first. You want to get those ones out of the way. And then you're going to move to the more difficult ones. For individuals writing essays, you want to write an outline, a summary, or notes, kind of an outline before you start writing. There's nothing worse than, having written already 1 or 2 or 3 paragraphs and then realizing that's not what you want to write at all. So making sure you have an outline or a summary, state the main idea forcefully, and then back it up with supporting details. When we're in person, again, writing as neatly as possible. There are some instructors who, if they can't read it, they can't grade it. Check the clock to stay on track. Relax, remembering to breathe. We have a lot of people experience test anxiety, which is an exaggerated sense of personal threat. It enacts our fight or flight response, which can lead to things like increased heart rate, sweaty palms, your breath ends up quickening as well. And we'll talk a little bit about test anxiety and relaxation. And it's also really important to note that poor performance on a test does not indicate personal worth. So if you don't do well on one test, it does not indicate your personal worth if nobody's ever told you this. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do poorly in the course. So if you fail one test or you get a D or you get a C, then that's perfectly okay. And they're just things to work on for the next test. I've failed tests in the past, and now I'm talking to all of you about testing strategies because you get better at it as time goes on. So it's okay to not do well in one test. It's not indicative of your personal worth. And it also may not affect your entire grade as well. Depends on percentages and points and a lot of other things. So poor performance does not indicate personal worth. So some more strategies for taking tests. So true false questions. So look for qualifiers or negatives. If part of the statement is negative, the entire statement is. Check each part of the statement, think true, and guess when you must. So ultimately, if you don't know the answer, guess. And that's true for multiple choice, for matching, and for true false. For matching questions, start with the item you are sure of and then move on to the items you are less certain of and then guess. So for matching questions, everything that you're sure of first, then you're less sure of, and then guess at the end. For short answer, ask only what is asked. Keep your answer short and to the point. If you have difficulty retrieving some aspects of the answer, then you can show what you know. So if you forgot something like proper terminology, show that you know in your own words what that term is, but that you couldn't remember the term. So that's a chance where you can kind of show what you've learned and, I didn't exactly know this term, but I do know how to explain it. So for multiple choice, be sure it's the best answer, not the all correct answer or answer that doesn't belong. So some strategies for multiple choice are: one, we want to read all the choices that are there. We want to cross out any that don't fit or the decoys. We want to stick to the subject of the course, so the answer that is specifically for the course. And then watch for negatives and extreme words such as only, always, or most. So with multiple choice questions, if you're able to cancel out other options that you know aren't true, you have a better chance of getting the answer correct. So if you have 4 choices, but you know for sure that 2 of them are not correct, then you just went from having a 25% chance of getting it correct to a 50% chance of getting it correct. For all of the above questions, look for 2 or more correct choices, and then usually it will be all of the above. So some other tips just kind of based on literature that may or may not be the most true, but so I'm going to put that qualifier there. But for numbers, if you don't know, cross out the highest and lowest and guess in the middle. Choose between 2 lookalike choices, crossing out the other options, and longer choices are often correct. So these are some tips just kind of based on research that's been gathered on test taking tips that people have kind of used in the past that have seemed to be helpful. So what do you mean by the best answer versus others? So what I mean about the best answer is that a lot of times, and it really depends on the teacher and where the test questions are coming from, whether or not they've been made by the teacher or kind of a test bank. But a lot of times there may be answers in there that you think are correct, but they're actually not by the way that the question is worded. So I just mean the best answer, not necessarily the all correct answer. So that's why it's really important to read the directions twice and to really make sure what the question is asking. So with that one, it kind of is about more like tricky questions, not necessarily more straightforward questions, if that makes a little bit more sense. So just make sure that you really are clear on what the question is asking and then the best choice for that question, if that kind of makes more sense. So test anxiety. So a lot of us will experience test anxiety and you'll have some level of it during an exam. A small amount can actually sharpen mental alertness and enhance performance, but over that, that's when it starts to hinder test performance. So what causes test anxiety? So a lack of preparation is a big one. Cramming the night before the exam also is going to create test anxiety. Poor time management, failure to organize test information, and poor study habits. All of these things contribute to test anxiety. Also, some of us may be more prone to test anxiety, which is also going to increase our potential of having it before an exam. So what are some causes and some physical signs? So causes are worrying about the following. So your past performance on exams, how friends and other students are doing, and the negative consequences of failure, which are often exaggerated, or we use this all or nothing thinking. If I don't do well on this test, then I'm not going to do well in the entire class. Also, losing perspectives. It's only a test. There will be others. That's important to note. Any or all of the following are going to be physical signs. So perspiration, sweaty palms, headaches, upset stomach, rapid heartbeat, tense muscles. Those are all going to be physical signs of test anxiety that could accompany it. The effects, we tend to get pretty nervous. We have difficulty reading or understanding the questions, difficulty organizing our thoughts, difficulty retrieving key concepts, doing poorly on the exam, even though you know the material. Sometimes we just have mental blocking, so going blank on questions or remembering the questions or the answers as soon as we turn in the exam. So these are a lot of the effects that we might feel if we have test anxiety. So how to reduce test anxiety? So there's a couple of ways in which we can reduce this. Studying and knowing the material well enough that you can recall it even under stress is a good way to reduce test anxiety. So using one of the strategies that we talked about previously, so the SQR3 or the 7-day study plan, we're going to have multiple exposures. We're going to be able to retain the information better. And then hopefully when we do have stress and we do have test anxiety, it won't create a mental block. Practice good time management and avoid laziness, procrastination, daydreaming, any distractions that you might have. But having good time management, having a study plan, making sure you're implementing studying at certain times of the week, all of that is practicing good time management and will help reduce your test anxiety. Avoid cramming the night before exams. That's just going to increase your anxiety and you're not going to retain as much than if you had used the SQR3 or the 7-day study plan. You want to build confidence during the semester. Again, we want to associate studying and test taking with positive feelings as much as we can. That's why I mentioned having the rewards. And learn to concentrate on the material by generating key questions from your textbook and your notes. Focus on keywords, concepts, and examples. Make charts and outlines to organize information in your notes and in your textbooks. So however best way you learn, and again, this is at times kind of a trial and error, but figure out what the best way it is that you can retain the information and have fun with the information, and then keep using that. And you can learn to concentrate by using one of those. So some relaxation techniques. So relaxation techniques that you can use either on Canvas, if you're taking an exam, if you're taking an exam live on Zoom, or when we get back to the classroom. So one of those is taking a couple of long, deep breaths. So not quick, shallow ones, but long, deep breaths to relax the body and reduce stress. So count to 5 as you breathe in and count to 5 as you breathe out. Focus your mind on your breath or some other object to kind of realign yourself and get reconcentrated. If you tense and relax your muscles throughout your body, that can also help with relaxation. If allowed, so depending on kind of what test format you're on, go get a drink or go to the bathroom. A lot of times if we get up and take a second, that kind of helps with the stress as well. If allowed, eat something. Again, being hungry is going to be a distraction, so eating something is good. This is more so like when we go back to school, but if you break your pencil lead and go sharpen it, then that's also an excuse to get up and kind of walk for a second. And then notice any negative or panicky self-statements and offer yourself reassurance. It's okay. It's just a test. Just kind of repeating that mantra to yourself. Because again, what we mentioned with the test anxiety is a lot of times we kind of have this all or nothing feeling that if we don't do well on this test, then we won't do well in the course, which may lead to not doing well at school. And we kind of snowball from there. So make sure that with negative or panicky self-statements, just try to give yourself as much reassurance as possible. Tell yourself it's okay, because that will also help with getting relaxed and kind of lessening your test anxiety. Finally, we talk about after the test. So we've talked about how to take notes, how to study, how to take the test, and now it's after the test. So during the exam, I mentioned, think of that post-exam reward that you promised yourself. Whether you did well or not, give yourself the reward. So whether you did well or not, give yourself the reward. Try not to dwell on any mistakes that you've made. but look at what you did and kind of go from there. So if I took a test and maybe I didn't do as well as I had wanted to, maybe I look back at my kind of strategy that I used. Maybe I didn't take notes in the most effective way. Maybe I took notes online and I'm better on paper. Maybe I didn't use the right study strategy. Maybe I used the 7-day plan and I should have used the SQR3. Maybe I wasn't as relaxed before my test as I could have been. So kind of looking at all of that and kind of adjusting and kind of seeing what you could do differently and see if that helps the next time you take it. And then finally, just relax for a little while. So after you take your test, give yourself some relaxation time, practice some self-care, give yourself that post-exam reward. So if it was me, I'd be going and getting my ice cream. Just give yourself a little bit time to relax before moving into the next thing. So during this time, we have talked about note taking, we've talked about studying, we've talked about test taking, test anxiety, some relaxation techniques, and what to do after the test. So this is the end of the presentation. So this is the time where you can ask questions. You can, raise your hand or put in the chat box, or you can also take yourself off mute as well.